Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to the LL3 podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida, and today's date, Thursday, December 31st, 2020. Just see, the sun has been setting on the final day of this year. And Happy New Year to everyone out there around the world, wherever you're at. Thank you for tuning in. I always like to make this very frank to all the folks out there taking the initiative to check out my show. So I got disagreements and I got people appreciate it, what I put out. And I thank you all for taking the time to listen, share, download, and all that. And I'm just very pleased. Even some of those other outlets like GeoSavan and Diesler and so many multiple outlets out there that got my podcast and they put it out there. Even Google, okay? Even though Google Podcasts as well. Just giving you a few. I thank all you folks out there for putting it out, for sharing it. And Spotify as well. Thank them too. Everyone that takes the time to hear other viewpoints and thoughts. My main purpose when I've done this from the very beginning is never trying to be some big, fancy podcast king or anything like that. That's been irrelevant. I just give you my intake, and I try to base out a lot of shows I've done based on facts, back things up, and it's been very cool. So I thank everyone for taking the time. Just check me out and share this. And always pay homage to all those podcasts that you listen to as well, because, hey, there's one thing I could tell you, one thing I tell you. I know I've been saying the same words in one sentence too many times. Big information war. It's been going on for a long time. And that's always been the goal of my interpretations and how I present my views on things and subjects and so forth. And I made some changes here and there, not too drastic. Always try to be persistent. And plus, if folks out there give me something else to check out, I thank them too. That's what information sharing is about. And a lot of these big tech giants don't want us to know that. They want us to shun us, deprive, take away our natural rights of communicating with one another. It's an exciting 2020, one way or the other. I can say that. And there's some folks that are hurting, losing their jobs. We can't blame capitalism at all. Not on the open free market basis of Adam Smith, the founder of that movement. Can't blame him. It's all when government gets involved in people's affairs. Neo-mercantilism, corporatism, etc. Even communism is not going to help out. All part of the propaganda machine. When I see the fist in the air, the communist fist in the air, and the Caesar salute, what the Nazis use, I treat it all the same. Negate it. Thoughtless. Herd conforming. Those are just a couple of examples. Liberty is born in every single one of us, regardless of our race, color, creed, gender, etc. Always judge individuals by their actions or merits. Nothing more. And always beware of the stereotyping, collective rhetoric, or witch hunting. I can tell you this. Good example. President Trump is probably the most well-known scapegoat in presidential history. Okay? In our lifetime. The greatest scapegoat. If it rains, blame Donald Trump. If you fart, blame it on President Trump. And don't get me wrong, I can be critical of him as well. But I'm not going to throw everything on his lap. That's laziness. That's being lackadaisical. That's saying that old commercial in the 70s, a girl using a bowl of Palmolive soap. Palmolive hands while I do dishes. Palmolive, dish pan hands. Don't get me wrong, dishwashers work too. Okay? But all the freeloaders out there, the slothers, the lazy asses. I don't like using vulgarity at times, but always gotta. They're the ones that complain the most. Can't even tie their own shoelaces or wipe their own rear ends. Don't be around the complainants all the time. If they don't take any action, you tell them to shut the hell up. Go somewhere else because you're contaminating space. Always have that positive insight and vigilance. What we're seeing right now, folks, can be a bit more aggressive when we hit the 2021. And of course, the Chinese Zodiac, Chinese year, February 12th, 2021, the year of the ox begins. Maybe good for some, bad for others. That's how it is. That's how life is. Biorhythms and all that. So, hey, I just did some great goals in 2020. And I like it. So, overall, I had a good year. I've been blessed. Work has been an issue? Yeah. I'm not going to disagree. Can't argue with that at all. It affected a lot of people. But I did my retirement funds and all that, and prepped up, paid most of my property, paid most of it off. And this happened, and I was going to do a few, it was very small, like pennies on the dollar how much we owed, and took care of that. So, even my dogs love it. Our dogs love it too. That's how I look at life. Stick with your families. Be good to your neighbors. Because you never know. Don't worry about the whole flamboyant thing. It's like people watching their Marxist Collegiate Athletic Association games. The Armed Forces Bowl? Fight broke out after the game was over. Bunch of little kids. Pretty sad. We don't know what the outcome was, but hey, it's entertainment, not a church. And you see all those college kids with their fists in the air and all that? Tells you one thing. They follow the herd. Just another cow. And I digress. So I'm going to do one article today. And this one came from GlennGreenwald.com, I think it is. Greenwald.substack.com. This came out like an hour ago. And this one's entitled The Kafkaesque Prison. The Kafkaesque. Good grief, I'm sorry, folks. The Kafkaesque Imprisonment of Julian Assange exposes U.S. myths about freedom and tyranny. The real measure of how a free society is not how it's mainstream. Well-behaved ruling class servants are treated, but the fate of its actual dissidents. Prosecution is not typically doled out to those who recite mainstream pieties or refrain from posing meaningful threats to those who wield institutional power or obediently stay within the lines of permissible speech and activism imposed by the ruling class. Those who render themselves acquiescent and harmless that way will, in every society, including the most repressive, usually be free of reprisals. They will not be censored or jailed. They will permit to live their lives largely unmolested by authorities, while many will be well rewarded for this servitude. Such individuals will see themselves as free because, in a sense, they are free to submit, conform, and acquiesce. Is it? Oh, yeah. Acquiesce. Yeah, okay. That's an interesting way I pronounce it. And if they do so, they will not even realize, or at least not care, and may even regard as justifiable that those who refuse this Orwellian bargain they have embraced, freedom in exchange for submission, are crushed with unlimited force. Those who do not seek to meaningfully dissent or subvert power will usually deny because they do not perceive that such dissent and subversion are, in fact, rigorously prohibited. They will continue to believe blissfully that the society in which they live guarantees core civic freedoms of speech, of press, of assembly, of due process, because they have rendered their own speech and activism, if it exists at all, so innocuous that nobody with the capacity to do so would bother to try to curtail it. The observation apocryphally attributed to the socialist activist Rosa Luxemburg, imprisoned for her opposition to German involvement in World War I, and then summarily executed by the state, expresses it best. Those who do not move do not notice their chains. The metric to determine whether a society is free is not how its orthodoxy spouting, well-behaved, differential to authority citizens are treated. Such people are treated well, or at least usually left alone. But every sovereign and every power center in every area, all over the world. You will not feel the sting of Silicon Valley or other institutional censorship as long as you affirm the latest COVID pronouncements of the World Health Organization and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Even as those decrees contradict the ones they issue only a few months earlier. But you will if you question, refute, or deviate from them. You will not have your Facebook page deleted if you defend Israeli occupation of Palestine, but will be banished from that platform if you live in the West Bank and Gaza and urge resistance to Israeli occupying troops. If you call Trump an orange fascist clown, you can stay on YouTube for eternity, but not if you defend his most controversial policies and claims. You can vocally insist that the 2000, 2004, and 2016 U.S. presidential elections were all stolen without the slightest concern of being banned, but the same claims about the 2020 election will result in the summary denial of the ability to use online tech monopolies to be heard. Censorship, like most repression, is reserved for those who dissent from majoritarian orthodoxies. Not from those who express views comfortably within mainstream. Established Democrats and Republicans adherents to the prevailing neoliberal order have no need for free speech protection since nobody with power would care enough to silence them. It is only the disaffected, those who reside on the fringes and the margin, who needs those rights, and those who precisely the people who, by definition, are most often denied them. Similarly, powerful officials in Washington can illegally leak the most sensitive government secrets and will suffer no punishment, or will get the lightest tap on the wrist, provided their aim is to advance mainstream narratives. But low-level leakers whose aim is to expose wrongdoing by the powerful or reveal their systemic lying will have the full weight of the criminal justice system and the intelligence community come crashing down on them to destroy them with vengeance and also to put their heads on a pike to terrorize future dissidents out of similarly stepping forward. One moment here. Journalists like Bob Woodward, who spent decades spilling the most extensive secrets at the behest of the ruling and class DC elites, will be lavish with rewards and immense wealth. But those like Julian Assange, who published similar secrets, but against the will of those elites, with the goal and outcome of exposing rather than obscuring ruling class lies and impeding rather than advancing their agenda, will suffer the opposite fate as Woodward. They will endure every imaginable punishment, including definite imprisonment in maximum security cells. That is because Woodward is a servant of power, while Assange is a dissident against it. So you got a whistleblowing slave and you got a dissident. In other words, as of this illustrates a vital truth, the measure of how free is a society, from China, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt to France, Britain, and the U.S., is not how its mainstream, well-behaved ruling class servants are treated. Royal court vassals always end up fine, rewarded for their subservience, and thus convinced that freedom abound, they redouble their fealty to prevailing status quo power structures. Whether a society is truly free is determined by how it treats its dissidents, those who live and speak and think outside of the permissible lines, those who effectively subvert ruling class aims. If you want to know whether free speech is genuine or illusory, look not to the treatment of those who loyally serve establishment factions and vocally affirm their most sacred pieties, but to the fate of those who reside outside of those factions and work in the opposition to them. If you want to know whether a free press is authentically guaranteed, look at the plight of those who publish secrets designed not to propagandize the population to venerate elites, but instead those whose publications result in generating mass discontent against them. This is what makes the ongoing imprisonment of Julian Assange not only a grotesque injustice, but also a vital, crystal clear prism for seeing the fundamental fraud of U.S. narratives about who is free and who is not, about where tyranny reigns and where it does not. Assange has been in prison for almost 2 years. He was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London by British police on April 11, 2019. That was possible only because the U.S., UK, and Spanish governments coerced Ecuador's meek president, Lenin Moreno, which he probably got blackmailed and got a good whammy by the Rothschilds, to withdraw the asylum extended to Assange 7 years earlier by his staunch sovereignty-defending predecessor, Rafael Correa. The U.S. and British government hate Assange because of his revelations exposed their lies and crimes, while Spain was enraged by WikiLeaks journalistic coverage and of activism against Madrid's 2018 violent repression of the Catalan independence movement. So they bullied and bribed Moreno to throw Assange to the wolves, i.e. to them. And ever since, Assange has been held in the high-security Belmarsh prison in London, a facility used for terrorist suspects that is so harsh that the BBC asked in 2004 whether it is Britain's Guantanamo Bay. Excuse me. Assange is not clearly in prison because the convict was convicted of a crime. 2 weeks after he was dragged out of the embassy, he was found guilty of the minor offense of skipping bail and sentenced to 50 weeks in prison, the maximum penalty allowed by law. He fully served that sentence as of April of this year and was thus scheduled to be released, facing no more charges. But just weeks before his release date, the U.S. Justice Department unveiled an indictment of Assange arise out of WikiLeaks' 2010 publication of U.S. State Department diplomatic cables and war logs that revealed massive corruption by numerous governments, Bush and Obama officials, and various corporations around the world. That U.S. indictment and the accompanying request to extradite Assange to the U.S. to stand trial provided, by design, the pretext for the British government to imprison Assange indefinitely. A judge quickly ruled that Assange could not be released on bail pending his extradition hearing, but instead must stay behind bars while the UK courts fully adjudicate the Justice Department's extradition request. No matter what happens, it will take years for this extradition process to conclude, because whichever side, the DOJ or Assange, loses at each stage, and Assange is highly likely to lose the first round when the lower court decision on the extradition request is issued next week. They will appeal, and Assange will linger in prison while these appeals wind their way very slowly through the UK judicial system, which is an illegal contract anyway, folks, on this extradition. Of course, that's considered political related, and that's totally, and it does conflict with that extradition agreement with the U.S. and Britain. All right, you can look it up yourselves. That means that, absent a pardon by Trump or withdrawal of the charges that by what will become that Biden DOJ, Assange will be locked up for years without any need to prove he is guilty of any crime. He will have been just disappeared, silenced by the very governments whose corruption and crimes he denounced and exposed. Those are the same governments, the US and UK, that sanctimoniously condemn their adversaries, but rarely their repressive allies for violating free speech, free press, and due process rights. These are the same governments that succeed largely due to a limitlessly compliant corporate media that either believes the propaganda or knowingly disseminates it for their own rewards, in convincing large numbers of citizens that, unlike in the bad countries such as Russia and Iran, these civic freedoms are guaranteed and protected in the good Western countries. The ample evidence showing that the indictment of Assange is the single gravest threat to press freedom in years, and that the arguments mounted to justify it are fraudulent, has been repeatedly documented by myself and others, so I will not rehash those discussions here. Those interested can see the article and a video program I produced. This prosecution, along with my apt in the Washington Post, Laura Poitras' New York Times op-ed last week on the indictment, former Brazilian President Lula da Silva's Guardian op-ed calling Assange's immediate release, the editorial from The Guardian and column from the Washington Post, media reporter Margaret Sullivan condemned this prosecution as abusive, and statements from the Freedom of the Press Foundation, the Committee to Project, journalist, Columbia Journalism Review, and the ACLU warning of these serious dangers to press freedoms it poses. Even conviction on bail jumping charges and the way it portrays in mainstream media discourse reveals how deceitful these narratives are, and how illusory are these supposedly protected liberties. Assange's misdemeanor bail jumping conviction was based on his decision to seek asylum from Ecuador rather than appear for his 2012 extradition hearing in London. That asylum request was granted by Ecuador on the grounds that Sweden's attempt to extradite Assange from the UK for a sexual assault investigation could be used as a pretext to ship him to the US, which would then imprison him for the crime of reporting of its illegal and deceitful acts. Such retaliatory imprisonment in said Ecuador would amount to classic political persecution, thus necessitating asylum to protect his political rights from attack by the U.S. In the case in Sweden was subsequently closed after prosecutors concluded that Assange's asylum rendered the investigation futile. When the U.S. grants asylum to dissidents from adversary countries in order to protect them from persecution, the U.S. media heralded it as a noble, benevolent act, one that proves how devoted the U.S. government is to the rights and freedoms of people all over the world. Recall the celebratory tone of U.S. media coverage when the Obama administration gave refuge in its Beijing embassy and then permanent asylum to blind the Chinese activist lawyer Chen Gaozheng, who had faced numerous criminal charges in his home country for his work against various policies he regarded as oppressive and unjust. American liberals depict asylum when granted by the U.S. government to protect against persecution in other Latin American countries, as so scared that the Trump administration's efforts to limit such asylum invoked their sustained fury. That fury is about to dissipate as Biden does the same, but with the softer and general language of reluctance. But when asylum is granted, hold on here, yeah, still there, okay. Okay, sorry about that. I'll continue on here. But when asylum is granted by other countries to protect someone against persecution at the hands of the U.S. government, then suddenly asylum is transformed from a noble and benevolent shield against human rights abuses into dastardly corrupt crime. That is how U.S. and British journalists routinely maligned Ecuador's decision to shield Assange from the possibility of being shipped to the U.S. to be punished for his journalism, or how they still speak of Russia's grant asylum to Edward Snowden, which shields him from being shipped to the U.S. to face a likely punishment of life in prison under the Repressive Espionage Act of 1917, a law that bars him from even raising the defense of justification in court, and thus attaining a fair trial, which is unconstitutional, by the way. Violates the Sixth Amendment. Under this propagandist framework, not only the government grant asylum against U.S. persecution, such as Ecuador and Russia, but also the individuals who seek asylum from U.S. persecution, such as Assange and Snowden, are cast by the U.S. and British media as villains and even criminals from availing themselves of this internationally guaranteed asylum right. Indeed, the British judge who doled out the maximum sentence to Assange for bail jumping, Deborah Taylor, sneered at his sentencing hearing that he uses asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy to insult the British judiciary, she added. It's difficult to emphasize a more serious example of this offense. By entering the embassy, you deliberately put yourself out of reach. Whilst remaining in the UK, you remained there for nearly 7 years, exploring your privileged position to flout the law and adverse internationally your disdain for law of this country. So is asylum in Russia, the only thing standing him between decades in a high security cage in the U.S. for the crime of revealing unconstitutional spying by Obama officials, is similarly scorned in elite U.S. media and political circles as something shameful and even treasonous rather than a perfectly legal shield under international asylum conventions against persecution by the vengeful and notoriously repressive U.S. security state. Here we see the blinding propaganda to which U.S. citizens are endlessly subjected. Asylum is always warranted when extended by the U.S. government to dissidents or outcasts from inferior countries, but is never warranted when granted by other countries to U.S. dissidents or other journalists and activists whose punishment the U.S. seeks. This warped formulation is potent because the U.S. media succeeds in peddling the toxic mythology that the U.S. has unique rights and entitlements that lesser countries do not, because, unlike them, the U.S. is a freedom-loving democracy that honors basic human rights and steadfastly guarantees fundamental civil liberties of free expression, a free press, and due process to all peoples. Next time someone makes this claim, explicitly or otherwise, tell them to look at the fate of Julian Assange, one of this generation's most effective journalists and activists in exposing the crimes, deceit, and corruption of key U.S. power centers, particularly its permanent security state. Assange is not even a U.S. citizen, having spent a week total in his life on U.S. soil and having absolutely no duties, legal, journalistic, or ethical, to safeguard U.S. secrets. But no matter, anyone who effectively challenges U.S. power must and will be crushed. That is because freedom of speech and press and other civic guarantees are granted only to those who refrain from meaningfully challenging the U.S. ruling class, i.e. to those who do not need those rights, those who need those rights, those who dissent, those who are disaffected, are denied them, definitely proving that these rights exist only on parchment, that in reality they are artificial and illusory for those who actually need and deserve them. Well, he's on target in those areas. I give Mr. Greenwald thumbs ups for that one. One of the areas we're always going to look at, folks. You're always going to have obstacles, be victims of tyranny, one way or the other. If you think white privilege exists, go ask Julian Assange. That's one example. And go and look up political prisoners. Many of them are Christian by faith, or whiter than you and me. Ask them about white privilege. It's all hot air. When you do stand for what's right, to expose the truth in good faith, they call you the troublemaker. Remember, folks, the mainstream media garbage, that's all it is. Alligator manure has a better sense of potent smell than that particular institution. You were born to be free. You gotta defend it by all means necessary. That's what the information war is about. A lot of these people in those institutions, they hate my guts anyway. And you know what? I get inspired by it. Getting mad, getting angry is too good. There's no fun in that. But there's people in prison right now by sticking it to the man. It doesn't matter if you like Julian Assange or not. I might disagree with the individual too, but he should not be a victim of government tyranny or any single one of us. So you think about 2021, how you as an individual can better make it better for you and your neighbors, humanity and beyond. The war on the press continues. Many investigative journalists have been murdered around the world. This has to end for all of us. As long as you got your facts, the truth, share it with people. Remember, they think we're cockroaches. They can't kill us all. It's all backfiring on them. Gabriel Brzezinski warned his colleagues, I believe it was the Trilateral Commission, one of those globalist meetings, when he stated that politically the world is fully awake. That was like 15 years ago, I would say, at least. And it's getting stronger every day. Remember the hashtag I have? Notification 2020? Well, I got another one, Notification 2021. It's time to strengthen that particular movement. Don't comply, nullify. And that will be it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or something that's interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence to Decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnote of this article on my Spreaker page. If you want to contact me, you can hit me at LokiLuck3@gmail.com or LokiLuck03@protonmail.com. And if you want to do a donation, you can hit me at PayPal me and cash.app/LokiLuck3. Okay? And I'm planning to get some more for next year. In addition, please contribute, show your love and support for men like Glenn Greenwald. All the journalists out there are trying to be truth seekers. We all have differences, but we have things in common. Focus on that. Common interest always prevails. That's what true activism is all about. Doesn't matter what avenue you go to. All right. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. May your guardian spirits be with you and have a happy and spiritually prosperous 2021. Always remain vigilant.